Namaskar and a warm welcome to Democracies of the World, the program that brings you the latest news of events affecting the democracies across the globe. We'll also talk about the functioning and makeup of their democratic institutions. In today's edition, our top focus will be on the West African country, Burkina Faso, where military has seized power and deposed the country's president. Over the next half hour, we'll also talk about the European Parliamentary system. I'm your host, Bhawna Nayar. Let's start the program with a first report from political unrest in Burkina Faso. Not long ago, the new year began. Another West African country announced military coup. On Monday, Burkina Faso's army said that it took control of the country, deposing President Roch Kabore, dissolving the government and parliament, suspending the constitution and shuttering its borders. This is the first coup in West Africa in 17 months. Last year, the military took over in Mali, Guinea and Chad, showing undemocratic transition of power. Meanwhile, world leaders have condemned the military coup. Here's the report.
Hundreds of people in Burkina Faso's capital have been celebrating after the military seized power on Monday. Civilians gathered on the streets, honking car horns and cheering in support of the military. The coup comes one day after a protest in the capital demanding the president's resignation. Burkina Faso's soldiers stated on state television on Monday that they had seized control and dissolved the country's government and parliament. They also stated that the country's borders had been blocked and pledged a return to constitutional order in a reasonable time. They also announced a senior military officer as their new leader. Meanwhile, the president has not been seen in public since fighting broke out on Sunday. Experts say the ousting of President Roch Kabore was unsettling but not unexpected. President Roch Kabore, re-elected for a second term in November 2020, has since faced protests and growing calls to step down. He has replaced the Prime Minister and military chiefs, but some critics say that is not enough. Kabore's removal was triggered by growing discontent among security forces over his alleged failure to adequately support them against militants linked to both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. Public confidence in the president's management of the security crisis sharply fell after an attack in the northern village of Solhan in June 2021. Over 100 people were killed in the attack. Another attack on the northern military base in November 2021 heightened anger towards the government. Meanwhile, the world leaders have condemned the coup. French President Emmanuel Macron condemned military coup, while the UN Human Rights Office said it deeply deplores the military takeover of power. West Africa, which until recently appeared to have shared its reputation as Africa's coup belt, remains susceptible to unrest. The military also took over in Chad last year after its president died on the battlefield there. Burkina Faso is one of the poorest countries in West Africa, despite being a gold producer.
And now moving on to Italy's parliament that has begun voting on Monday to elect a new president. The voting will last several rounds over several days. Take a look at all the details.
Italy's lower chamber of parliament began voting for a new president this week, ahead of what is likely to be an intense and contentious period of reforms in the country. Key candidates include Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who is leading a pandemic unity government with wide political support. Draghi is the former head of the European Central Bank, and his leadership has steadied Italy's political establishment, which is notorious for its instability and frequently changing government. Former Premiers Giuliano Amato and EU Commissioner for the Economy Paolo Gentiloni, former Chamber of Deputy Speaker Pier Ferdinando Casini are also contesting. Many are hoping for Italy's first female president. Candidates include current and former Justice Ministers Marta Cartabia and Paolo Severino respectively. Senate Speaker Elisabetta Casellati is also tipped for the job. Former Prime Minister and business magnate Silvio Berlusconi, the 85-year-old leader of the right-wing Forza Italia party, was campaigning for the post but pulled out owing to ill health. The president is elected for a 7-year term by an electoral college comprising 1,009 people. Ballots are cast in secret by 630 MPs, 321 senators, and 58 regional representatives. Candidates need to receive a 2/3 majority in the first 3 rounds and an absolute majority of 505 votes in subsequent ballots to be successful. Anyone with Italian citizenship who is 50 or older is eligible to contest, must be a registered voter, and must not have been legally barred from being in office. The role of the Italian president is often seen as largely, though not exclusively, ceremonial. As the head of the state, he upholds the constitution. The key roles include naming the prime minister and, on the latter's advice, government ministers. The president has the power to dissolve parliament in consultation with the speakers and also ask it to reconsider legislations. The president appoints 1/3 of members of the Constitutional Court and also has the right to pardon. It is rare for a president to be elected in the first rounds, given the required 2/3 majority. The process is expected to last a few days, with a winner likely to be announced before the end of the week. The race is currently wide open, with competing political factions supporting and opposing the main contenders, including Draghi.
Moving on to the election of the President of the European Union Parliament now. Robert Metsola was elected President of the European Union's Parliament, putting women in 3 of the 4 biggest jobs in the 27-nation bloc. She will lead an EU institution which has become more powerful over the years and has been instrumental in charting the course of the 27-nation bloc on issues such as digital economy, climate change and Brexit.
Christian Democrat Roberta Metsola from Malta was elected President of the European Union's Parliament. The 43-year-old Metsola is the youngest and only the 3rd woman elected to the post. She is the first woman in the role for 20 years and is one of the 3 women in the top EU jobs, along with the heads of the European Commission and the Central Bank. Her election is the highest international post ever held by a Maltese national. During her maiden speech, Metsola laid out her priorities, from modernizing parliamentary practices to encouraging diversity and tolerance. She vowed to respect the European Parliament's majority opinion in favor of abortion, despite her long-standing political and personal stance against the procedure. Her 2.5-year-long tenure comes before the crucial 2024 EU elections, with a to-do list that includes digitizing the economy, beefing up the bloc's military, slashing carbon emissions, and shoring up rule of law across Europe. Metsola secured 458 votes of the 616 cast, amounting to 74% in the first round of voting. She ran against the Greens candidate, Swedish member of the European Parliament Alice Bakun, and Spanish MEP Sira Rego from the left. Polish MEP Kosma Zalotski withdrew his candidacy ahead of the polls. A vocal supporter of the EU, Metsola was first elected as a member of the European Parliament in 2013, representing the Nationalist Party in Malta. She was elected as the first Vice President of the European Parliament in November 2020. She is a lawyer specialized in European law and politics. Her election came days after the shock death of outgoing Parliament President David Sassoli, who was due to step down. 65-year-old Sassoli had been sick for several months, and before his death, the Italian politician declined to seek another term. The European Parliament represents the EU's 450 million citizens and refers to itself as the heart of European democracy. It is the legislative branch of the European Union and one of its 7 institutions. The role of the President of the European Parliament is a largely ceremonial one. The duties of the President include representing the institution vis-à-vis the outside world and its relations with other EU institutions. The President also chairs the Parliament's plenary sessions, both when MEPs gather in Strasbourg once a month and also in Brussels. For many years, the European Parliament, which sits in Strasbourg, France and Brussels, was seen as a money-guzzling talking shop where politicians who had served their national purpose often were sent. As it gained decision-making powers, the legislature has become a more forceful player on the European scene. Metsola, in her tenure as president, wants to continue that trend.
Let's now know more about the European Parliament now. The European Parliament is the EU's official first directly elected parliamentary institution. Elections to the European Parliament take place every 5 years and with over 450 million people eligible to vote. They are considered the second largest democratic elections in the world after India. What is the European Parliament and how does it work? Here's a brief guide on one of the European Union's core institutions.
The European Parliament is the only directly elected European Union body and one of the largest democratic assemblies in the world. It is the legislative branch of the EU and one of its 7 institutions. Voters elect its 705 members or MEPs once every 5 years from all 28 EU countries, and the President heads them. The European Parliament is based in Brussels, Luxembourg and Strasbourg. The European Parliament has 3 main roles: legislative, supervisory and budgetary. The European Parliament is part of the legislative or law-making process in the European Union. Most proposed laws must be approved by the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union to become a law. If the law is about EU budgets, the Parliament can only advise on it. It does not have the power to reject the law. Unlike most national parliaments, the European Parliament cannot initiate legislation. The European Commission is the only EU institution with the power to start new laws. It also plays a role in the EU's relations with other countries, including those wishing to join the bloc. Parliament's work comprises of 2 main stages: committees to prepare legislation and plenary sessions to pass legislation. The Parliament numbers 20 committees and 3 subcommittees, each handling a particular policy area. The committees examine proposals for legislations, and MEPs and political groups can put forward amendments or propose to reject a bill. During plenary sessions, all MEPs gather in chamber to give a final vote on the proposed legislation and the proposed amendments. Now let's take a look at how do European elections work. European elections are one of the biggest democratic exercises in the world. Over 450 million people across 28 European countries are eligible to vote and to choose their next representative for the European Parliament. These 28 countries vote on different days, each with its own electoral laws. Each country is allocated a set number of seats, roughly depending on the size of its population. The smallest, Malta, has 7 members sitting in the European Parliament, while the largest, Germany, has over 90. The first European parliamentary elections took place in 1979, what was then called the European Economic Community. That community has now expanded to what's known as the European Union. Until 2019, 751 MEPs were elected to the European Parliament, which has been directly elected since 1979. Since the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union in 2020, the number of MEPs, including the President, has been 705. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
It's time to slip into a very short break. There are many other stories lined up for you in our program Democracies of the World. But all this after this short break. You stay tuned to Sansad TV. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special program, Democracies of the World. A Libyan Parliament committee on Monday said that the chamber should choose a new interim prime minister. It also ruled out fresh elections for at least 9 months after a planned national vote collapsed in December. A move based by the American-based parliament to replace Abdul Hamid al-Dbeibah, who was installed through a UN-backed peace process, might be rejected by other factions. The UN-backed plan had called for both parliamentary and presidential elections on December 24, but the preparations for the vote fell apart over disagreements about fundamental rules, including over the eligibility of some main candidates. After the election process collapsed, the parliament set up a political roadmap committee to look at what to do next. It also proposed a vote in parliament on Tuesday to select a new prime minister. Moving on, US President Joe Biden confirmed that Kamala Harris would be his running mate after he were to run for a second term. Addressing a press conference to mark his first year in office, Biden confirmed that if he runs for a second term in 2024, he would nominate Vice President Kamala Harris as his running mate again. Biden's remarks, though not unusual since it would have been rare for a sitting president to undermine his vice president, assume significance given recent critical reports in the US media about Harris' working style and possible challenges from other contenders in the party if she positions herself as a presidential candidate in 2024. Harris, the first woman and person of color to be elected US Vice President, has seen her approval ratings plunge since she entered office. And now moving on, the president of Armenia announced his resignation this week, complaining that his office has not granted sufficient powers to allow him to be an effective head of state. In his resignation, Armen Sarkisian said that the president does not have the necessary tools and opportunities to influence foreign policy, economic, investment policy. Sarkisian was in a standoff with the country's prime minister over a number of issues, including the dismissal of the head of the armed forces. At a referendum in December 2015, Armenia became a parliamentary republic, while presidential powers were significantly curtailed. Sarkisian was elected president in 2018 as Armenia was transitioning from a presidential system of government to a parliamentary one. 68-year-old Sarkisian briefly served as Prime Minister of Armenia in 1996 to 1997 and was a long-time ambassador to the United Kingdom. Austria has become the first EU country to make vaccination against COVID-19 mandatory after its parliament voted in favor of the bill last week. The compulsory vaccination law is due to come into force at the beginning of February this year and apply to all persons aged 18 and over who are registered in Austria. The authorities will send a notification by mail. The start of this phase will depend on when the mandatory vaccination law comes into force. The authorities said from March 15, compliance with the obligation will be monitored. A fine of up to 600 euros is provided for violation. The maximum fine during the year can be up to 3,600 euros. The exceptions are people under 18 years of age, pregnant women, for whom vaccination may be associated with health risks. And now moving on to story from New Zealand. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern cancelled her own wedding as she tightened COVID-19 restrictions in the face of an outbreak of the Omicron variant. The country is bracing for an outbreak of the highly infectious variant as increasing numbers of cases were identified at border isolation facilities. The South Pacific nation has moved to a red setting under its COVID-19 protection framework with more mask wearing. Indoor hospitality settings such as bars and restaurants and events like weddings is capped at 100 people. The government has delayed a phased reopening of the border to keep Omicron out while it rushes to administer booster vaccination shots and begin inoculating children. And before we end, in a rare find, a pristine reef of giant rose-shaped corals has been found off in the coast of Tahiti. The reef is thought to be one of the largest found at such depths and seems untouched by climate change or human activities. The reef, which lies at depths of more than 30 meters, likely took around 25 years to grow. Some of the rose-shaped corals measure more than 2 meters in diameter. We leave you with these visuals. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. Namaskar.